So welcome to this week's episode of Leaders on a Mission, where I'm joined by inspiring leaders driven by the impact of creating a healthy and sustainable world. Now, in today's episode, I'm joined by Ann Michiels, an internationally recognized leader in AgTech, and spent the last 25 years or so within the ag and AgTech industries. And Ann, thank you so much for joining today. It's great to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, and it's quite an exciting experience for me. I don't do podcasts every day, so let's see how it goes.
Oh, Anne, you're going to be a podcast star, I can tell, basically. But tell me, like, for you, you've spent your whole career in the ag industry. Tell me a little bit around, as you growing up, what were the key kind of forces in your upbringing that, the key influences that really shaped, I suppose, where you are now, as it were?
Yeah, I guess my father and my grandfather were farmers. We had a high-tech greenhouse at home. So from early on, I think I learned how to ride my bike in the greenhouse. A couple of weeks, it was empty a year. I would be playing around my family there. So I've been early on exposed by farming and tomato production. I used to love the whole idea, and I used to do the math that my dad could potentially provide all the tomatoes for the whole village we were living in, and that's what the village was eating. Or the whole idea when the seeds came in, and they were like, the tomato seeds were super tiny, and I remember my dad telling, and in those days they still planted them themselves, at least when I was young. He would say, don't blow, because these seeds are more worth than gold by the kilogram. So it is something that early on stuck with me. But it also came together with the aspect that I saw my dad working very long days. In summer, it was super hot in the greenhouse. We had years that were really good financially as a farming family, but there were also years that I think I was on a scholarship a few times because it was very tough and vacations were short. So I kind of was raised with this whole concept, like if I study well, I'm not going to take over the farm. And I think even though I was raised by it and fascinated by it, I never thought of ending up in agriculture at all. I was planning to become a teacher, not an agronomist or a leader in ag. Certainly not.
And so what happened then? I mean, so what changed? It's interesting. So you were like, I'm going to definitely do something else in my life and career. And then all of a sudden, 30 years in ag. So when did the reconnection come? Tell me a little bit around, just in terms of, maybe when your career started out, for instance, how come you decided a career in agriculture?
It is a little bit, I mean, probably that's not how you always tell it in the interview, and it's not that I lie about it, but it was a little bit serendipity because I finished with a dual degree in education and bioengineering. And I went back home to the village where my family was living, and I was applying for a teacher position in the village next door. So my first interview, I go on my bike, it was a sunny day. It was for teaching mathematics and biology. So I thought I was super qualified, all motivated. I left working with young people. So I'm there. I do the interview, and the director looks at my resume, and he said, because I went to school there, he said, Anne, I remember you as this rebellious, adventurous student. Are you now at the age of 23 going to come back to the school, bike every day and teach here? I would love to interview you maybe next year, but first explore some other options, talk to other people, and then next year we'll talk again. And I was super, super frustrated because I thought I could do, he probably had another good candidate anyway. But I think it took me a couple of weeks to really explore PhD programs. And this is actually where it took off. I really got fascinated by research. So the PhD was definitely the right choice. And through this PhD, I ended up doing a postdoc in the United States. And this is how I think the idea to just be there for 3 to 4 months for part of my postdoc. I just ended up, I went with 2 suitcases and I came back with a full container with a lot of junk, a husband and 2 kids 14 years later. So, I know we always ask in careers, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I know how to answer that correctly, but honestly, a lot of things just happen. And it's all fine. I probably would have been super happy as a teacher as well. I still have a lot of when I see good teachers, it still gives me goosebumps. But so yeah, and that's how I step by step moved back into agriculture through the research training that I got.
Yeah. And so what was your PhD in?
It was, it was in Belgian endive, which is this white vegetable. Then I moved for the postdoc, like many people in plant science. I worked on this weed, which is like a model crop. So I worked on Arabidopsis. And then I realized that then the farmer background came back in. My dad never understood this whole fundamental research thing completely. And then I really thought I wanted to do something with my skills that brings me back to that old sentiment, the idea to feed a village or to be a tiny part of that whole impact you could create. This is how I moved back to agriculture and food production.
Got it, understand. So you weren't always going to be destined for a career in research. It was more going to be about how you could apply that and how you could use some of that research, basically.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, no, great. So look, you had a really super successful career. It looks like you spent some time in the US, you spent some time in Europe, you know, you worked for some startup growth companies, you worked for, you know, corporates, you know, as it were. So thinking back at your career, what was, you know, maybe give us a couple of reflections on a couple of positions that you really kind of enjoyed within your career.
Well, it's hard to pick because I think every position and situation has its ups and downsides. And out of any experience, I really learned a lot. But I'm left with a lot of friends and people that I think will be connected to probably my whole life. Maybe a very special one was my first step in industry was when I started a subsidiary for a kitchen in the United States. And I was very young, I think end 20s, just done a postdoc or some short-term positions. And I came on board to do scouting for technology, which I thought is fantastic. Just go talk to smart professors and scientists, drink coffee and try to set up collaborations. But then when we started the whole business in the United States, the then appointed CEO left quite early. And kind of by accident, I started, you know, taking care of a lot of things there. With support of the Dutch team. And I think 1 year into it, we were hiring people, we were like growing the business, and I was so engaged that I do remember having that discussion with my manager to say like, look, it would be nice to have a better title to represent this group here. And so I always joke, you know, like my first title almost in corporate was CEO. So what else is there? It was obviously a very small team. It's nothing like a real CEO out there. But I think that was very interesting because it was very broad. It was so out of my comfort zone. You had to manage a payroll. You had to hire people. I had not done any of that. We built up a team from scratch with a group of people I'm still very closely connected to. And talking about impact, these people are all doing super well in their own personal career, now have kids and families of their own. So I think that was quite impactful. And what we also did there, because it was the early days of using a sequence technology in breeding. So we were, I mean, obviously, together with the Dutch team, very much involved in sequencing and assembling the first crop genomes. And what I really liked is that in my US team, I had hired many people that had sequenced the human genome, which is something we rarely do in plant science. But since we didn't have this expertise in plants, we hired that group. And they were really involved bringing some of the existing technologies from the human genome into the plant world. And out of this SNPedia and human data platforms, we actually developed the early stage of the Cropedia, which is still an important platform that's still used by many companies today. So
what is that platform? I hadn't heard of it before. What is it's very much used in vegetable seed companies. It's basically a data analytics platform that helps you use genetic and genomic information to improve your crops. So here a small commercial aside for a great platform. No, I think it was a wonderful experience, and the group still exists, is doing very well. Yeah. Great. Now, I know you had a lot of different roles and companies and scientific kind of, you know, a lot of your career was spent in R&D and it was spent with science. How do you describe I mean, was it a lot of work within the sequencing and genomics and breeding kind of technologies? Is that the kind of main kind of background and kind of strength of the profile?
Yes. That is actually how I started, but growing into bigger organizations. And once you start managing bigger teams, it went quite broad, actually. At some point, I also had a chemical group in my team. I had a biologics a research team that I was managing. I've done field crops. I've done teams in vegetable seeds. I think thanks to the rapid change of all these big organizations again and again, year after year, as a young manager, and I'm very grateful for that. You get the opportunity to explore a lot of different options and develop quite a bit.
Yeah, no, great. And it's always an interesting journey, isn't it? I suppose from research to broad kind of R&D leadership, because I think at Syngenta, that's probably where you had your biggest team, right? So,
correct.
You know, I don't know how many people you were in charge of, but it's some transition that actually. And as a keen researcher, how do you make that, you know, what are the keys to being successful in making that transition out of the comfort zone of your domain specialism into more broader leadership?
You know, honestly, I still think I'm learning every day, and I'm learning as much from my managers as people in my team. One of the things that for me was quite remarkable, and I see many of my colleagues struggling with that, you don't have to be the best plumber to lead a plumbing team. I think I learned to lead a team by leading a group of people outside of my expertise. I think managing breeding teams, which are super technical, experienced people without having been a breeder myself, was probably a very interesting learning experience, because you really have to lead and make sure they can do their job well. And you have all the experts you need in your team, and you just need to leverage their expertise on the topics when relevant. And that is something I really recommend younger managers to do. Please leave room for the experts in your team to tell the story. And you just make sure they can do their job well. And obviously, when there are challenges on budget and structure and governance, you need to take your responsibility. But that, I think, is one of the things that I learned quite a bit. And there to actually involve your team in key decisions. Reorganization and change gives a lot of stress. For me personally too, I really get very stressed when I get to hear that we need to shrink a team or reduce a budget, because I know it will have painful impact for families of people that work with you. But then if you dare to have, and I'm very grateful, because that's exactly what we did with the Syngenta team, to involve the teams in a careful way and actually help to reshape the new structure you put in place, even though it involves cost cutting and reorganization. It takes trust, because you will end up slightly more to the left or the right than you had in your own mind, or maybe your manager had in his mind. But by involving the team, before you even finish with the change, you already are implementing a new organization, a new way of working. And to have been able to do that with my team then, and to get the trust from them to do this, which is not quite common, and to have the trust from the leadership there to go that path was phenomenal. And that is also something I would like to give to others, like dare to really involve people and openly talk about things you want to change, and don't put it top down on them. What mostly happens is you will lose your best ones because they can work anywhere. And the ones that are stayed sometimes are demotivated or they have double jobs. So if you lose your team on the change and your top, the key people in the team that bring the others together, that have the key expertise, you fail. So
yeah, difficult balancing act, Dan, really difficult. And it's interesting to hear you talk about the stresses of that. And as your career would have gone on, budgets are bigger, teams are bigger. It just would have been, you know, the broad part of life for you, right, around there. So, you know, how did you cope with that stress then? How did you kind of, it's clearly part of the job that's not nice. So how did you cope with that?
You know, honestly, I think that is a real journey. That has been a real journey for me. And I probably grew a lot in this and I learned a lot, and I think I do way better, but there's still days I need to ask help and feedback from people to help me with that. I think one of the most challenging things for me is when and that you have that in any big organization where you have a big meeting culture and discussions, and then the politics come out, and I understand it pretty well how it goes, and I know also how to play in it, but it's something that just drains so much energy. And especially if it's 80% high level meetings and discussions and 20% execution and team leadership that you work in. I think that these are difficult ones. And for me, I learned to really get close people around me that I trust and that I can ask advice from. And I've learned to actively plan in running and swimming. And not that I'm like a top sportswoman, not at all, but I really plan this in with priority. And if I can start today with a run or a swim, that's what I schedule in. So and it helped tremendously. Sometimes if you work less hours, but you can actually schedule these breaks in, you're so much more effective. And I know that is not for everybody possible when you work in a culture where it's, I mean, not even 9 to 5, but 7 to 8. And everybody does that. And, the lunch is also a work meeting. Then it's hard to do that. But
yeah. Well, look, you've given the corporate world up these days, so sometimes, I don't know, sometimes you're growing in your career, you're going up the ladder, there's more and more responsibility, but life's a bit different for you now, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, I can actually schedule a run in the morning since I'm independent consultant. Yes,
yeah,
correct.
No, absolutely. And I know you get a lot of energy from working with kind of smaller, more entrepreneurial companies as well now, and being able to kind of guide and advise those. Tell me, I'm going to say the word surprise, but I've been working across AgTech for the last 6 years now, 7 years. Non-agricultural background beforehand, and I'm just amazed at the amount of innovation, the amount of young companies, the amount of capital that's kind of come in. Has it surprised you just in terms of the birth and the development of this industry?
I think I've not been so surprised of the innovation potential because I literally grew up in that, and I have a big belief in the impact of technology in agriculture. But what I have seen really growing the last couple of years, and I think the challenges on impact on environment and social structures and the relation with ag, I think really put that in a roller coaster almost. The budgets that we get in AgTech innovation in the venture capital world here now to really invest in startups is growing tremendously.
Yeah, absolutely. And Belgium's a very interesting kind of hub for this as well, right? In terms of the innovation kind of ecosystem. I've not visited because you're kind of quite close. Am I right in thinking you're quite closely aligned where you work with some of the Ghent innovation? Yeah. But apparently this is a very exciting dynamic. It's like Silicon Valley in Belgium, basically, right?
Yes. I think historically, the whole region around Ghent has invested quite a lot in biotech in general, but also in plant biotech. So we have very successful startup companies that really grew to, large acquisitions, and many of them are still around and have active research teams on board. I think the interesting part of this area, because I'm literally living at the border between Belgium and the Netherlands, I think the combination of the Dutch breeding ecosystem around Wageningen University combined with the Ghent area makes it for starting companies an ideal ecosystem to find talent, to find partners in the network, because honestly, if you want to be successful as a startup today, you cannot do this alone. So you need to be surrounded by the right ecosystem for innovation. And I think, and still we are in small countries, right? Paris is also 2 hours away. UK is very close. You can actually go back and forth on the train. So I think you have there is quite a lot of expertise in this area. Maybe we don't have the highest investment budget yet in Europe, but a lot of expertise is here and is very well connected to the rest of the world. So it's exciting times also for me to see all this booming of startup companies around me.
Oh no, it's great. It's great. And tell me though, from a viewpoint of the industry, when you look at you look at AgTech, what do you see as? I know there's lots of problems that need to be solved, or lots of solutions that can help with the environment and sustainability. But what do you consider, in your mind, say a couple, the top 2 or 3 kind of areas you think, you see a lot of concentration from companies or technologies to help solve problems?
I honestly, and it's such an old one, is just the yield potential and crop efficiency or production efficiency is still a big one. We have many crops or vegetables or food that we eat daily where we just have yield is not going up. Wheat has been, yield increase has been mostly flat or very, very smallly rising up over the last. And the more we can have a crop efficiency and production efficiency, the more land we can make available again and give it back to nature. So I think there's a huge potential there. And then taking into account that we not only have to have crops that are quite efficient, but that also can withstand the heat and the drought and the climate changes we have to deal with, I think are tremendous. And there is quite some work in crop development as such, but very little on specific reduction or resistance or tolerance against stress factors. So I think that's a big area.
Yeah. Has that basically, have we just been in a system, and an agricultural system, where everyone it's been more volume, and as a result, the focus on yield has not been there? How have we got to this?
It's in general, seed production in field crops is mostly around yield. So I don't want to say we haven't done any work on yield. I mean, a lot of my friends and colleagues will tell me that was a terrible mistake, the way I presented it. So that's definitely not the case.
Yeah.
But I guess that we just have. It is just no. I think it has to do with how the challenges and how difficult it is to really measure effective yield. So whenever just looking at variety development or trait development, if you make a gene edited variety that has a higher yield, when you put this trait in different genetic backgrounds, so different germplasm, you can have an effect of the genetics. When you take that trait and you put it in a different environment, it will affect yield. When you take 1 year and 1 season, depending on the weather, you will have a different result. So it is very difficult to measure that effectively. And we were coming a long way with now a drone technology that can help us with that. We have sensor technology. We're really integrating, the farm management practices with better measurements of the yield. So I really believe we're making steps there, but that is really challenging. And it takes a while. You need to have really a satisfying result. You want to test 3 years in multi-locations, and that is just takes time and is not cheap. So I think that's one of the challenges there. And we are so used to work global. So we ideally have the magic trait that fixes it for all genetic background in all markets. And it's that's certainly not straightforward. Otherwise, we probably would have solved it many years ago.
Yeah, and obviously, crops only grow a certain amount of. There's only a certain amount of times during the course of the year when crops grow, basically, right? So yeah.
That's one of the common questions from investors. What if we double the amount? Can we go double as fast? And for certain things, absolutely. But if we are depending on seasons and field trials, you can go north and south and, try to have 2 seasons a year. In greenhouses, we sometimes try to do many crop cycles a year. So we're really moving forward there, but not for all crops and not for high level field trials. So we're still limited in agriculture with timelines that are slightly longer than when you work at companies that focus on food fermentation or other technology, the digital technologies or the software-based products. You can go incredibly fast.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have the regulation as well for things, in terms of, some of the challenges in bringing some of new crop protection solutions to the market. And it seems that to get authority can sometimes take like 5 years plus to get to get this. Do you see this changing and evolving and speeding up at all, or does it remain kind of a super long time?
It is still complex, and it's still taking quite some time, but I see it, I'm very optimistic here. Not everybody agrees with me probably on this one, but I see it moving. And it's just first steps, right? We're talking now, for example, about gene editing. Field trialing is allowed in the UK. We're talking about Switzerland, really looking at opportunities for field trial. We are not yet allowing growth of these foods or crops, but I think it's moving. And also globally, we see the first gene-edited tomatoes on the market in Japan. And this, I think, there is also kind of this realization that if we really want to deal with these challenges of climate change, where agriculture has a big responsibility, providing more space for nature, so we can really make sure we don't lose all the biodiversity we have now with plant species around. We really need to make sure we wisely apply all the technologies in a safe and responsible way that we have and have available to really fix some of the challenges we have.
Yeah.
And we need, it's not just even about regulation and law. There's also a consumer perceptance. People are, consumers are very well spoken, and I think right so. So it is we will be gonna have to move forward without further polarizing the crowd around. And I think that's the biggest challenge.
Well, consumers are confused, basically.
Yeah, it's difficult. When I'm a consumer in the weekend, I'm confused too. And I'm supposed to know it, right? Or some of it.
I mean, it just seems that on the one hand, we've come through a journey of, non-GMO to all of a sudden understanding big sustainability and environmental challenges, basically. And the consumer's appreciation of that is changing, but I'm wondering if it's changing enough for them to be able to accept, certainly in Europe, to accept some of the gene editing kind of, technologies. Where do you think it will play out? If you think about some of this disruptive gene editing technology, for instance, right? Where do you think it will play out in years to come in Europe, for instance? Do you think there will be a general acceptance to use this, or is this never going to happen, you think?
I wish I had a glass ball, I probably could, with that I could make quite a lot of money in the exports because it's quite emotional. It's about food. There are a lot of stakeholders. Honestly, it will be very difficult. One of the things that, because we're allowing it, and it's much easier to deregulate. Everybody is CRISPRing and gene editing in their garage, basically, from a research perspective. And it is so challenging to really follow and monitor all these potential gene edits that are made somewhere at some point in food and crop production. It will be very difficult to check and control it. So even from a practical perspective, it will be very challenging in Europe to follow a different path than the rest of the world. Honestly, I think, and it's difficult. I'm probably guilty of that as well. I think it's not just for us scientists to explain how this works, but I think just empathically listening and understanding the concern of consumers, and at least when we communicate and share our opportunities for technology integration in ag, be sensitive to what's happening and we cannot just technology push forward, brings solutions into communities that don't want it. So I think just trying to respect different opinions and moving away from that. I think it's more like taking a systems approach to technology development rather than pushing something into a community that is, because in the end, it's the society who decides.
Absolutely. And tell me, you mentioned about the tomato in Japan, the gene-edited tomato. I didn't realize that. How different would that tomato be to a normal tomato, from a taste functionality perspective? Why bother? I mean, what genes did they edit, for instance, and what?
I think it's actually interesting. It's not sold through the seed industry, or it's really sold to smallholder farmers, and you produce a tomato that has extra health benefits. And you can buy them online on the website. I've tried it, but it's all in a Japanese. I mean, you cannot order it outside, obviously, but it's very interestingly set up. It's online. It's an online platform that you buy your tomatoes on, and there is just a limited amount of growers that could have access, which also creates this excitement too. And I think it's the first season. I haven't followed yet the follow-up in the detail, but it's a very different approach from how we introduced other technologies in the past. So interesting.
Yeah. Do you foresee, like now, because from what I understand, some of the gene editing technologies and some of the, it enables crops to be bred a lot quicker. Am I right in thinking that? Like the gene editing technologies, it helps facilitate quicker breeding cycles.
In a way, it can speed it up, but I think what adds more is we can really improve the performance of the crop. We can add a resistance trait to drought, or we can add a resistant trait to a fungal disease, and by doing so, by gene editing, you can actually do it quite effectively and very specific. So it's almost like improving a crop very specific in a location where you can actually have a huge impact.
Yeah, and great stuff.
And that will help us a lot, because we want to reduce pesticide and insecticide use quite substantially. But if we want to do that, having native traits, but also created technological traits in our crops will help us here to make us reduce the use of all these chemical applications. And not only, I mean, this will be in combination with biostimulants and biologicals as well, to really help us to change the way we manage our crops.
Yeah. Okay, great. And so I know that you're working and you partner a lot with early stage companies, that have really innovative technology. And look, it's a really exciting landscape. Well, what do you see as the real challenges for early stage CEOs and early stage companies in evolving and growing their business?
Yeah, I think that there are many. I'm always amazed when I see these talented CEOs growing small companies. It's quite inspirational to see them taking that up. There is obviously the challenge of getting funding. I think that's what keeps them awake, and having them bring in the right investors for their next investment round. On top, some of them have never managed teams, and certainly not grown teams. So they need to hire people, they need to structure a pipeline. So these are really things that because they have never had that experience is quite challenging. And then on top, it's only relevant if you have a business perspective clear and a return on investment for your investors. So there is a whole relationship with the industry and the business that they actually also need to take up. So
yeah, big challenges. Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing how many of the founders are scientific founders, and all of a sudden they're kind of running a business, and it might be their first job, or they've never necessarily hired a team before. So there are so many challenges. But what really strikes me, every stage of growth it requires something different from a team perspective. So you're having to transform and evolve. Do you hire now for the skills, or do you hire into how the company are going to look and grow into in the next kind of 18 months or so? It's a real challenge, isn't it? You have a lot of respect for CEOs and founders that that do well. But tell me, how different is it? Working in a startup, working in a, when I say how different, not everyone can work in both environments. How do you see that early stage kind of environment, and what do you really need to have in order to succeed within it?
Yeah, it's I guess definitely the founders and the early stage crew that really starts and kicks off a company. You need to really have a clear vision and a passion for what you're doing and developing. And the perseverance to really stick to it. And I mean, at least stick to the mission, but be open to input and feedback to actually maybe even change the product you originally were planning to develop, or the path to market you were planning to set up. I think that that is something that the success of a starting crew is really depending on their resilience together with their openness and willingness to adjust and get input from people that have been around in the industry for a while and actually can help you with this network and these challenges. So I think that's key, and that's not easy for them. And then it's a very fast moving pace. I think it's 7 days a week for some, 24 hours a day. Quite lean. You need to bootstrap, often with very small budgets. One day you're in a suit pitching you're in front of investors. The next day you're on your knees helping to put a new server in place or moving furniture because you're into a new space. So this is not for everybody. I think some people coming from big organizations that move into a small startup are really struggling with that aspect because
Absolutely. I think the other thing as well, it's a fascinating industry in terms of it's really consolidated. You've either got these massive firms, conglomerates of 4 of them, as it were, and then you've got thousands of small, innovative companies. I know one of the challenges is really around how to engage with those bigger companies. And a lot of the small companies really struggle with that, and they really, in terms of furthering a pipeline of development and structuring things. Any advice for CEOs or companies in terms of how to best go about that collaboration?
Yeah, it's this is also a challenging one. Do you want to go early, or you want to have the risk to go too late to build those relationships? If you go too early, they might take over part of your pipeline, and if you don't negotiate well, you lose quite some of your rights. If you go too late, it's too late because people need time to build up a relationship and trust, and they might not be, or you're not really pitching something that they're interested in. I think here my advice is, I think it's like that, right? If you take up if you think you cannot do it alone, the challenge you're focusing on is probably not ambitious enough. So for those CEOs, reach out to people in your network, ask people, as advisors or as interim managers on your team that do have that experience and that can bring you the connections and the knowledge that you need. It's again, you don't have to do everything yourself, and that is definitely an area. In a way, agriculture is very innovative. On the other hand, it's quite conservative. It's built on long-standing relationships, people that know each other for years, that do business with the same group of people again. So to get in there, to have the code for the door is something they need help with.
Yeah. That's an interesting one. Agriculture's always had it's had a reputation as being quite a male-dominated industry, as you said. Lots of long-term relationships, farmers, that whole kind of ecosystem. I suppose just your reflections when you look at diversity now. You've been on a journey where you've progressed and found yourself in senior kind of positions. What have been the challenges for you on that journey, and have you seen things change?
I think some of the traditional values on friendship and relationship, and I kind of like that because it really comes from values that I appreciate a lot. So it's not, if I use the word conservative, I don't mean it in any political sense or in a way I think that it comes with a lot of I really love the industry, so this is part of it. On the other hand, there is indeed the challenge that it has been historically not been so diverse. I've found myself, especially in the early days, as quite much younger than my colleagues, often the only female in a leadership team. But I have to say, even from early on, I had this dad, and he thought a daughter or a son, it didn't matter. He made me, drill holes and walk around with tools. And I have to say, even early career, many of my managers and peers really supported me, gave me a lot of trust and responsibility, and I'm super grateful for that. But there have been moments, and not even, in fact, often it came from somebody who didn't even realize. It was not a nice way to ask or to put something forward, but I've been asked to in a meeting with only male colleagues, where the sandwiches are, or if I could get the coffee, or if I could get the notes. And don't get me wrong, I have no problem taking notes and getting coffee, but it comes just from a traditional, and it happens unconsciously. Interview, and then they ask who takes care of my kids when I travel, because you have a management position, or if my husband liked the salary proposition, and then I always wonder, like, is this something you ask to, the other people that interview with me that have another gender? Or so there is some of it that's challenging. When I had bigger teams, you can see salary levels of across backgrounds, across gender, and we do have an issue.
Yeah.
So we're not there yet, but I do see a lot of willingness of people to not just put international women on leadership team, make it more diverse, but also make it inclusive. It's not just by putting somebody with a different background on a team that it's you're done. On the contrary, I think that's when the hard work starts, to really make it inclusive for those people who bring different ideas.
Yeah.
I believe there is still a long way to go, but it will take quite a lot of commitment of people to learn together and be open to feedback. I probably make a mistake in that whole area where I'm so passionate about around diversity inclusion. I make a mistake like every 2 weeks, a minor one. I get feedback from people. I think I once recommended somebody to hire somebody with I think I said farmer's son, type of background. And I was laughing because I'm a farmer's daughter myself. Like, even for me, you're just so formed by a society that just you have these stereotypes, and it's easy to stick to it. So I think it requires quite some change and commitment to make these small steps of how we talk and how we express ourselves, but also how we nominate people on boards, how we put people in leaderships, and how we develop and mentor young people with a diverse background towards these positions.
Yeah. Tell me, do you think female CEOs make better CEOs than male CEOs?
No, I think and definitely in R&D, I think having a nice mix of people that form a leadership team are important.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't, in the end, it doesn't really matter how you look like, or if you're tall or long, or you have red hair, what your gender is, your sexual orientation. It shouldn't matter at all. On the other hand, it is important to make sure we start creating that diversity on the teams. And if it needs a little help by supporting, and working with quota, we need to do that in the transition, because it will just not happen by itself. It's too much stuck in how we are used to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, Anne, I could talk with you all day about that and these topics. And I just wanted to thank you very much for coming on. You've shared some, some great experience and knowledge, and really appreciate our conversation today.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure.